Okay, without further ado, I'd love to introduce Evans Karen and Brett Cooper, who's joined us today. Evans has 30 years of experience helping organizations in both the corporate and public sector improve operations through organizational development, leadership development, and operational excellence methodologies. He has facilitated highly successful improvements and cultural initiatives across multiple industries. He's the co-author of the bestseller, Solving the People Problem, and his new book on developing leaders, Success Starts With You, will be out this fall. Brett, who is the co-founder of Integris Performance Advisors and the co-author of Solving the People Problem, has been supporting Washington State's lean journey since 2011. The Integris team has trained and coached several thousand agency employees on how to implement lean efforts more successfully, which has helped people across Washington government learn to work together in more productive, more effective, and more human ways. So without further ado, thank you so much, Evans and Brett, for being here today, and take it away.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Teresa. So I'll be taking portions of this, and Brett will be taking portions. We may pick on one another occasionally during the presentation based upon prior history. What can I say? Okay. So the new book, Success Starts With You, actually is going to come out in the winter. I was moving along really well, and then some of my characters started doing things they were not supposed to do. And I've had to kind of follow along and see what's happening in their stories. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And actually, we're going to follow one of those characters a little bit as we go through our time today. So the story starts, and I think we might as well start there as well, with a congratulations. Many of you have already had this happen to you. You've got a new team. You've got new responsibilities. It's a bright day. It's a sunny day. Things are going wonderfully. What could possibly go wrong? Could we please launch poll number 1? So which of these are things that might go wrong as you step into a new leadership role? Please mark any that you think are going to be impactful for you. We'll just give you a minute or so to kind of wrap that up, and we'll take a look at the results. And here they come. Oh boy, there is an awful lot of blue. It looks like almost every item we put up there, more than half of the people chose as this is something that's happened. Let's see, our winner, well, winner may not be the proper term. The one that showed up the most often with 61% was struggling to balance goals and resources available. Yeah, we've all walked into that buzzsaw. This is great. Here's a new challenge. By the way, it's impossible. Have fun, right? We had a whole lot of others that were all in the 50 percentiles, balancing people and getting the job done, dealing with different perspectives, holding people accountable, always a big challenge for people, and having trouble getting through to everybody on the team. As a matter of fact, the one that was lowest on this was actually with just over a third of the people providing clear feedback, which is a challenge for so many people, but that was the least challenging thing we felt in this role of stepping into a new leadership role. Wonderful. Now, we've been working with teams for a long period of time, and what we have found is a lot of these things show up. These are just a few of the concerns we hear. Finding your footing. How many of you get promoted to lead the team you were a member of? And that switch from friend and coworker to leader can be really challenging for us. Figuring out our own leadership style, figuring out the styles of other people, supporting instead of actually doing the work, which is sometimes easier and feels a lot safer to us to do as well. All of these things are things that we hear from most leaders when they get a new role. The big thing that I want every one of us to take away from this is you're not alone. being a leader means being overwhelmed at times, having to deal with those very difficult challenges that are facing us from many different directions and being able to step into that. The good news is you have the power to improve your situation. You can do the things by growing your own leadership skills, your own ability to take these things on. You are actually the secret to success for this. It's just that we may not feel like we have all those tools readily available to us. So it's how do we get to those? Okay. And I'm going to turn to a little bit of research that we've seen from some friends of ours, Jim Coos and Barry Posner, who actually did a little bit of a study of where role models came from and what were the role models that helped us to increase our own success. So what I'd like you to do, we're going to launch another poll here real quick. I'd like you to think about a role model for you, the most important role model you have, and which of these categories do they fall into? Are they a business leader, community leader, maybe a member of your family? Is it a player for the Seahawks or something? I don't know who it is, but who's your role model, the one that you would look up to? And I just want to see what this crew says, kind of, here's where my role model comes from, my most important role model. Okay. So poll number 2, which category represents your top role model?
Evans, the poll that I'm seeing, I think, has a flaw in it. I don't see Kanye West anywhere in this list.
I believe he goes by Ye now.
This is true. Kanye or Ye, I don't see him on there. It's shocking that he wouldn't be a top role model.
Okay.
Sorry, April.
Sorry. Yeah. Too soon. Okay. All right. Please get your votes in. And survey says, okay, interesting results. I see top here is actually family members with 42%. Business leaders with 20, and then it gets really split up. Coaches and teachers with 19, community leaders of the next group. Boy, even with my throwing out the name Seahawks, not a single one went for the professional athlete. Well, 2 went for the professional athletes, not enough to get 1%.
Doesn't even round up to a percentage.
Yep. This actually bears a lot of resemblance to what we see when we've done this with much larger populations over time. And the important part here for us to remember, and a lesson I think for all of us here, is that in reality, it's the people who are closest to us. That's who is going to be our biggest role models. And when you think about it in terms of leadership, it really comes down to, as a leader for your team, you are the most important leader in your organization. It's not the department director. It's not anybody. It's the person who they are interacting with on a frequent basis, their individual team leader. So all of us need to kind of step up and say, here's how I can actually help make that happen. There's a wonderful resource out there called the Leadership Challenge by Jim Coos and Barry Posner. And they talk about 5 practices that leaders do more frequently that separate them from otherwise credible people. So these are 5 practices that we do frequently to actually lead people well. And those are to model the way, to inspire a shared vision, to challenge the process, to enable others to act, and to encourage the heart. And the only secret I want to share about this for you right now is every single one of those is a personal choice we make. They are not things that we need to wait for somebody else to do. They're the things we can do individually, right? It's where we say success starts with you. These are actions we can take to move forward. What I always want to think about in terms of leadership is this. Leadership is something that grabs hold of you and doesn't let go. And this is also a quote from Jim and Barry. And the idea here is, if you care about people, that's what drives your leadership. That's where the energy comes from. Leadership is not about the power that you have. It's about the power that you give. It's the ability you give to others to be more and more successful as we go into the future.
And hey, Evans, Whitney made a comment in the webinar chat that I just want to underscore, that The Leadership Challenge is a great book. One of the things that we want to do today is try to give as many resources and tips for people to learn beyond this. And so I think Whitney just kind of underscored one of them. The Leadership Challenge is a great book. It's available on Amazon, available lots of different places. And if you are a leader, if you're a supervisor, a manager, a director, The Leadership Challenge would be a fantastic book to add into your library. No question.
Yeah. It's one of the entry points if you want to become a leader. It's a great way to kind of look at what can I do to grow in that way. Okay. One of the ideas that comes out of them, as a matter of fact, Jim was talking about this just last week with me, is the fact that challenge is actually the opportunity. It's the crucible and the opportunity for us to up our skills. We learn through that challenge. That's where we're going to do our best. It's where we're going to grow the quickest, right? Challenge and opportunity are tied together. And when we look at it that way, when we're stepping into a new role, we're stepping into a challenge. And when we step into a challenge, we want to hit a couple of great resources that you can use to up your skills. We want to tell the story of a leader who stepped into a role. And this is going to be kind of from the book that we're going to have coming out. We've got a leader who stepped into a role, and it's a difficult team he's joined. It's a new organization. He doesn't know these people. These people have not had a great time in the past. And he's got to get them to be a cohesive, emotionally balanced, wonderful performing team. So we're going to hit 4 different keys that he goes through in experiencing this. We'll tell a little bit of the story as we go here, but he wants to create that space so that every team member can exceed to the best of their ability. So we're getting really quickly: emotional intelligence, psychological safety, some listening skills, and some feedback skills. All of these things, if you downloaded the handout that we gave you, there's a lot in there, including some I'm not going to get to during our presentation, but I wanted the tools to be in your hands. So we're going to kick this off. I'm going to have Brett talk a little bit about emotional intelligence and how we grow our emotional intelligence.
Yeah, and really the journey in this book, our protagonist is a gentleman named Sam. And at the outset of this book, he really did start to get an understanding that he needed to grow his emotional intelligence. And so as we discuss emotional intelligence, well, let's first define, well, what the heck is emotional intelligence? Well, we define it this way. It's your ability to recognize and understand emotions in yourself and others. And Evans, if you could put the next slide up for me. And your ability to use that awareness to manage your behavior and relationships, right? So it's about understanding yourself, understanding others, and then using that information to improve how you interact with folks. So if that's the what, let's look at the why. There was some early research on emotional intelligence by Bradbury and Graves that said that emotional intelligence in their studies, they found that it was 58% of job success for anybody that was in a supervisory or higher role. So if you are leading people, if you are directing people, if you are guiding people, emotional intelligence, they found in their study that it had a bigger impact than your technical skills and your God-given IQ. Now, there's another study that I think is the one that really drives me, and I know it had some influence on some of the decisions we've made as a business. And so I'm going to ask you, with this one, we don't have a poll, we have a chat, but I'm going to ask you to use the chat and answer this question. What percentage of workers would you guess say that clashes in personality and communication styles are their number one source of workplace conflict? Go ahead and pop those in the chat. And let's see what kind of numbers are coming up here. Wow.
Oh,
That moves fast when we have 600 people on here.
Sure
But I'm getting the sense, I'm seeing 90s, 80s, 70s. There's a few that are a little bit lower, but I'd imagine if we were to average that, we'd probably be looking somewhere in the 80, 90%. I think we need to redo this study, Evans, because in the study that I'm citing, that number was actually only at 62%. Now that was pre-pandemic, so I don't know, maybe it's grown since then, but I think this might be an opportunity for us, Evans, to actually try to redo this study. But whether it's 62% or 80%, to me, as a professional whose job for the last 20 years is to help people build better teams, be a better leader, and help drive better organizational excellence, this is a major concern. As a matter of fact, just a little side story, the reason that Evans and I started this company 10 years ago is for the 10 years prior to that, he and I were working at another organization doing Lean Six Sigma, process improvement, kind of exclusively. And we were doing the black belt training and the Lean Sensei work. And we had some fantastic projects. But the thing that kept getting in the way were issues around teamwork and leadership issues. So we decided to start Integris at that point to say, well, we got to keep going with the lean tools, but let's bring in more teamwork, more leadership kinds of things. And in fact, over these last 10 years, our business has exploded on that side of things. We still have the lean process work, but man, the leadership and the teamwork seems to be getting in the way for a lot more people than we even originally thought. And I would argue that that exact situation is what then led us to name this thing that we call the people problem. We see this as the underlying problem. So Evans, if you can go forward, the people problem, we like to define it this way. It's the fact that so many of us don't understand the differences. And if we don't understand the differences, we can't honor the differences. And it was really that combination of seeing so many people saying that those clashes in style were so critical in their workplace, and recognizing that people just aren't understanding and honoring the differences. That's really what led us to write this book called Solving the People Problem. And so inside Solving the People Problem, there's all kinds of information about communication. And I have a quote here that I want to ask you. Again, let's use chat. Let me know if you agree with this. You can read it on the screen. I'll read it aloud here as well. So the quote is this: communication is not about speaking what we think. Communication is about ensuring others hear what we mean. Would you agree with that? That's 110%. That's about yes, yes, yes. Agree, agree, agree. I love this. I love this. Yet so many of us, when we talk, we don't really care who we're talking to, right? We are going from our perspective, and we are going through our lens of the world. We are going at our pace. We are going at our level of detail that we like to give, whether it's high or low. And we don't necessarily take a lot of time to really understand and honor the people around us and what their preferences are and what their tendencies are. So in Solving the People Problem, we talk about this language for building emotional intelligence. And I'm sure this is not going to be new news for many of you on here, but I have to put it up. It's DISC. It's DISC, which is a language and a tool that helps people understand themselves, their own styles, and the styles of others. And then ultimately, the holy grail of it all is when we do that on a team or we do that in an organization, people come together and they can then adapt their behavior for the mutual benefit of everybody involved. And what we find is that language of DISC really does help people grow their emotional intelligence. As a matter of fact, I like to look at the language of DISC as really a language for understanding the differences. If you see on the screen now, you'll see that there are 4 different comments that 4 different people could be making about the very same issue. And if we go back to that question about, is communication about saying what you want to say or helping people hear what you want them to hear, this gets right to it, right? Because at any given moment, you might have different people on your team saying things like what you see here on the screen, let's get it done. Someone else is saying, well, let's get excited about it. Someone else is saying, well, wait, is everybody on board? And somebody else might be saying, well, wait, do we have all the details? And every one of those questions is valuable. Every one of those questions should be asked. But where that conflict comes in so many times is when the individuals that's saying, hey, let's get excited, And then there's another individual saying, well, hang on, do we have the details? They don't honor each other's differences. They don't look at it and say, you know what, that's a good idea. Let's get excited, or let's get those details and let's come together and make it better together. They get frustrated. And that's at that root of that frustration. And so the truth is, when teams and leaders build their emotional intelligence and they embrace that language of DISC, the result is that they understand those differences better, and that then opens the door for honoring the differences. And my summary point here on this emotional intelligence idea is that honoring the differences, that is really the key to building work relationships that really work. And Evans, if you can forward for me. Yeah, that is what Sam was trying to do, our protagonist in the book. That's what he was trying to do. Evans, you had a comment?
Yeah, I was saying there are a few comments that are coming in the chat around the fact that the presentation we're giving tonight, we've updated and changed a few slides. So I wonder if we will go back and change the handout to include the slides that we have just added. We can do that if that would be really helpful to people.
Yeah, why don't we'll talk with the Results Washington team and find out what their logistics are. Yeah. We'll see what makes the most of sense. Absolutely. There's a couple of things in here. But the very next slide actually might answer that question, because in our story that is coming out with the new book, Success Begins With You, the gentleman, Sam, this is where he started, right? He started with building his emotional intelligence, and he started his journey by coming to a presentation that we gave, and he got this book, Solving the People Problem. So since that was the start of his journey, we'd love for it to be the start of your journey. So if you look on the screen, you will see that there is a URL, solvingthepeopleproblem.com/keynote. If you go to that URL, you will have the opportunity to download for free either the ebook or the audiobook or a executive business summary. You can have all three of those absolutely free. And what I've been talking about here is included in that. It talks about a lot of these things, and it shows that DISC model. So I encourage everybody to go to that URL, get that, because that will start you on a path that our protagonist Sam went down. And what you will find is, as you go through that book, you will find that if you start implementing some of those ideas, you're able to build an environment on your team where those work relationships will really work, and you're going to open up the door so people can give better feedback, more effective feedback. People are going to be actively listening to each other. And generally, you're going to create an environment that has a lot of psychological safety. So Evans, can you tell us a little bit about how Sam took his team down that path?
Sure. So he was introduced to the book. He took a look at that. He started to try and gather those ideas around how he could be a little bit better at understanding other people's styles as well as his own, and what might be some of the limitations that he was creating himself. And one of the things that came up as he was looking through that was this idea of psychological safety. So I don't know how many of you have been in a situation with a team where you've asked a question and it's silence. There's no response. Or you ask people to try something and people are really hesitant to take those steps forward, right? That relates to the idea of psychological safety, and psychological safety is a really big topic out there, and it's come out of a couple of different places. Google did a study on their best teams, and what they found was this was one of the biggest differences between their top performing teams and other teams. And there's a wonderful book by Amy Edmondson out of Harvard called Fearless Organizations, where she talks about that idea of psychological safety. Okay, and if you could launch our third poll here, I just want to see how many people see some of these issues showing up in their own organizations, right? What does it look like in their own organizations? So how easy is it to raise difficult concerns, issues, and mistakes in your own organization? Is that something that a lot of people find impossible? Is that something that everybody is expected to do and it's easy for everybody to step into that? And Brett, if you could check, somebody's saying they're getting an error on that website. So I'm going to check our link. Okay. So I'm just curious, how much psychological safety do you feel like is showing up in your own organizations?
So Evans, we are getting a lot of submissions. I don't know if maybe it's getting overwhelmed. I see in the chat that some people have said, oh, it worked fine. And a couple other people saying that they're having an error. Perhaps try a different browser, perhaps wait until a couple of minutes, something like that. If it still doesn't work for you, people can email me directly at brett.cooper@integrispa.com and I'll make sure you get it.
Thanks, Brett. Thanks, Brett. All right, and here are our results of our poll. And it sounds like most of you are feeling like, boy, this is still challenging, right? A lot of your organization has been pursuing lean for a while. It's hard to be lean if we can't step in, try, experiment, bring up ideas that are a little bit different, right? So we had 40% of the people said it was challenging, 23% said tolerable, and it was really only about the last third that's saying it's relatively easy or expected and accepted in our organization. So although we've been moving down this lean pathway, there's still some things we can do to open it up and make it easier for people to really step in fully. So here's just a couple of things that popped up in terms of Sam's story as he was working through this. So Sam joined a team that had been beat up. Their previous leader led by fear. Okay, you know, you will do what I say kind of stuff. So he had to step in and he had to help create a change in that mindset for people, that it wasn't right or wrong and punishment was coming. It was, wait a minute, we all have to figure out how to change, grow, move forward. Okay, another one of those resources I might recommend for those of you who have not read this one already would be a Mindset by Carol Dweck. D-W-E-C-K. Wonderful book about the idea that in general, we have mindset of either we are a fixed mindset of we are who we are and that's what it is, or a growth mindset of a new idea, a new challenge is an opportunity for us to expand, to grow in different ways. Sam found he had to overplay this consistently with his team. It didn't matter that he said we have a growth mindset. If people have had an experience that's different from that, and there's a little bit of fear in there, it's going to be really tough for them to step forward. So he found he had to repeat this many, many times, and he had to look for those ideas where people took the little challenge, took the little opportunity, and lift that up and call out the experiences that people were doing so that people would see that was something that was going to be rewarded on an ongoing basis, right? The thank you for disagreeing. How can we find a better way, right? It's looking for that, okay? The other thing that Sam did that was really helpful for him was he acknowledged his own challenges. He became vulnerable as a leader. And that's one of the things that all of us could really learn from. When we are vulnerable, it doesn't make us weak. It actually shows strength to people. It shows that we can trust people enough, that we can ask, that we all feel like we need each other. And it makes it easier for them to ask us as well. It shows them that that vulnerability is okay, that for them to step in, for them to work a little bit with this is really helpful for us to do it, right? The other aspect that I think all of us could really learn from is relentless curiosity. It's not about knowing, it's about questioning, it's about learning, it's about growing, it's about changing. And staying relentlessly curious is a very powerful tool for inviting others to share, right? We're going to hit listening in just a minute, but I saw a comment from Danielle a little bit earlier that was around it's, I'm going to get it wrong. It's around, it's not just listening, it's actually hearing, it's actually taking those ideas in. We want to be relentlessly curious. It's not about getting to our answer. It's about finding a joint answer. It's about finding new knowledge. It's about being able to move forward. Okay. And the other thing that I think is really important for us about psychological safety is this. people hear psychological safety and they worry that it's soft, but it's not. Psychological safety is saying we need to be able to be honest with one another. We can't operate out of fear. We need to be balanced. Psychological safety is not safety over accountability. It is both safety and accountability. It's tying those two together. If you want to look at it in a kind of a graphical way, you could take a look at it on those two scales of psychological safety and accountability. What you would see is if I only have the safety, but I don't have accountability, that's just comfortable, but it's not progress. Okay. If I only have accountability, but people don't feel psychologically safe, that creates great anxiety among everybody in the workforce. It's when we can tie those two things together. I can welcome the new idea. I can pull that out. I can say, hey, let's bring those things to the table. And it's safe to do so. But we also need to actually get the work done. It's when we balance those two, that's where learning and performance really take place. That's where our teams move forward dramatically. Okay. Now, part of doing that is actually building your listening skills. And Sam, wonderful guy, was not always the world's best listener. Okay, to be perfectly honest. And what he found was that part of this learning and part of his growth over time was learning better to have intention and presence when he was actually listening with people, to be much more intentional about what he was trying to get done and to actually be fully present with people. And I think this has become a real challenge in our society anymore. Could you go ahead and launch poll 4, please? Okay. So how often do people really listen to you and understand what you're saying and feeling when you're talking with people, work, outside of work? How often do you think they're really hearing you? And you feel really comfortable they got your message and understand what you're thinking. I was kind of curious on how this one's going to kind of go out. Oh, not too bad. The big winner with just over half was people who said this sometimes happens. The next one was actually often. We had very few in the almost never or infrequently. Okay. That makes me feel really good. Yeah. Having had kids who grew up with iPhones and could all be in the same room and not talking. Yeah, this makes me feel pretty good. Okay. Super. So let's close that poll up. And actually, let's launch another poll. I'm actually enjoying the polls here. I like seeing what's going on here. So if you please launch poll 4, or excuse me, poll 5. Okay, so now here's let's be really truthful with ourselves. How often are you really listening and honed in on someone else's message? And how often might you be checking email, on your phone, playing Tetris, if people still play Tetris? How often are you of a divided interest when you're really listening to people? Can you really say what they're saying, what they're feeling?
Tetris?
I'm an old man. Well, I don't know, I don't know what to say, man. Yeah. So if you're truthful, Wordle. Yeah, I should have gone with Wordle. That's true.
Although I'm sorry, I'm not hating on Tetris. I'm not hating on Tetris. My mom loves it.
Okay, cool. And here people are saying they're listening pretty well also. We've got sometimes and often are kind of our ties that are just 42, 43%. That's really wonderful. And nobody said I almost never, which is wonderful. Since you're leaders, that's really important. Okay. So I'll be honest with you. I am occasionally a little bit more guilty. I'm occasionally caught with where I should be really present. I'm not as present as I should be. It might be that I'm looking over here at the chat going on, or the Q&A, or I'm not looking at my phone actually. But frequently in today's world, we are so scattered with so many things pressing on our time. It's really easy to lose a little bit of that focus. So I'm going to give you a kind of a quick memory device here. Very simple. I'll call it ACE listening, right? And it really stands for these. It stands for having the attention, the curiosity, and then the engagement in working with people. Okay, really simple model, but it's a really important model. Cal Newport does a couple of wonderful books about how we think and how we can do deep and meaningful work. He calls our current society the hyperactive hive mind. We're all so busy with emails and somebody's bombarded with messages that we feel like we need to hop back and forth, and it's really tough to do that deep focus to listen completely. Okay. So in terms of attention, for me, it's avoiding external distractions. How many of you, when somebody says they want to talk, actually put your phone completely away or turn away from your computer or just actually really sit down and communicate with a person? It is so easy to be distracted by things going on in our background. We need to create the environment where we can actually do that.
I like this one, Evans. No, go ahead. I'm listening. Go ahead. I'm listening.
This actually looks way too familiar, Brett. So, yeah. Okay. So we got to avoid those external distractions. It's all the machinery that ties into our lives anymore. Okay? But it's also those internal distractions as well. How many of you have an action item list that's running in your mind kind of constantly? It's the little things that you're kind of just cycling through that may get in the way of your actually hearing the message and the feelings behind that message. Right? I find both of these are critically important. It's our external, but it's also making the space to clear your mind a little bit so you can actually listen.
Hey, Evans, a question came in.
Yeah.
That says, I have a problem getting too much into other people's emotions. I pay attention too much and it starts influencing my own emotion. Jocelyn asked, are there any resources for those who need help with boundaries during conversations? I'm interested in your perspective on that, but I will say that this is absolutely a real concern. And when we talk about emotional intelligence, we tend not to be talking about becoming a counselor for other folks. And in fact, you always need to protect yourself. Matter of fact, we're going to be talking a little bit about psychological safety. And psychological safety is both being safe for others and also for yourself. And so having some of those boundaries is absolutely an important thing. Do you have anything to add to that, Evans?
Yeah, I think you're actually hitting about as deep as we're going to be able to get into in this one. When we're doing that, we want to listen to other people. It doesn't mean we have to accept what they're saying. It's their story, not ours. But if I don't hear their story and I'm trying to respond to them without them feeling heard, that's where we're going to cause a much more frequent problem. Okay, so we want to make sure that we're actually hearing what they're doing. We want to make sure that we're not actually just kind of taking on their story because it's not ours. So
very interesting point in the chat also related to this. That is, I'm not as present as I used to be before the pandemic. It's like I'm not used to talking with people anymore after being so isolated. We've seen a lot of that, right? So much of our interactions have been on this, that we're always on, we're talking about the issues at hand, and then some of that other kind of chatter kind of goes away. We used to be able to walk out to the parking lot together. We used to go grab lunch together and things like that. And there was definitely a different kind of interaction that people had. And for some people, the pandemic, that isolation really did have an impact as far as having them pull back a lot. The more, one of the things that we try to get our teams to do is, if you are still in a fully remote world, try to find some times where some of that remote and virtual interaction isn't necessarily just at the topics and the objectives of the team. find a way to build some time in. A lot of you know that we do a lot of work with a teamwork model called the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team. And when we do that work, one of the things that we hear time and time again from teams is we'd have more vulnerability-based trust in our team if we got to know each other on a more personal level. And that has really become a much more difficult thing to do. And I would say it's actually not terribly difficult. It's quite easy to do, but it's just really easy not to do it. Right? It's not that hard to say, okay, we're all going to get on as a team and we're going to have some conversations that don't focus necessarily on a particular, business topic, but we're going to use that time to get to know each other. But everybody doesn't want to participate in that. And for a lot of us, we seem to feel that, hey, that's not really moving our progress forward. And so there really is a new balance that needs to be struck between that personal interaction and that productivity on teams.
Yeah, we have found a lot of leaders are doing very well through the pandemic by being a little bit more intentional about not letting that just go away entirely. By making sure that we remember we are humans working together. And if we only think the task, sometimes we get a little disassociated with one another. Okay, it makes it a little bit more difficult. Okay. Yeah, I see introverts loving the status quo. I have a daughter who's an introvert who said, I spent 30 some odd years preparing for this when we all got shut down. Okay. There is a difference, right? Styles plays into this as well. So it's not about being intrusive, but it's about providing that opportunity to be able to have a little bit of human interaction. Okay. So it's about attention. It's about really being able to be present with one another, which is something that unfortunately does not happen as often as we would like. The next piece of this for me is it's really about curiosity. It's about listening to understand. It's about listening to say, what can I learn? What can I see? How can I move forward? And it's looking for both context and content for clues about what we can learn in this, in what we're doing. It's making sure that when I'm listening, I'm not listening to respond, but I'm listening to learn. I'm listening to understand. Okay. And the last piece of ACE, so attention, curiosity, and the last piece is engagement. And this is where you ask questions. You find out what's going on, not in a prying way, but you show your interest by asking questions to learn more, by gathering a little bit more. And you show that you've actually listened when you actually check for understanding with people. So what I've heard you say is this. Did I get that right? This is your concern? Right. As we get better with those skills, get a little bit deeper in there, we're actually able to build a little bit stronger relationship in moving forward. We start to prove to people that our listening is not to get to our answer. Our listening is to learn to find a better answer. When we listen and really listen well to people, people are much more willing to listen to us as well. There's a playoff there that helps one another. Okay. The last piece we were going to talk about, but we started to have some good conversations, was feedback. So I really want to appreciate the fact that when I asked you on one of those earlier polls about the things that worked well and didn't work well for you, feedback was the one that was the least challenging for you when taking on teams. Okay, so I'm going to just talk for that for just a minute or two, but we broke out a bunch of stuff in feedback to give you some tools and some insights, because feedback for most groups is a thing we all know we need to do. It's a thing we all would like to generally be better at. It's a thing we need to practice on an ongoing basis. So I'm just going to hit a couple of things here. So feedback is critically important. It's how we improve our performance, right? We need other perspectives to gain. And when we think about feedback, there's 3 types of feedback here, right? There's both positive reinforcement, which we cannot forget. There's constructive feedback, and then there's that occasional negative feedback where there's something that a behavior has to just stop, right? Most of our feedback is going to be in that positive, hopefully, and then a bunch in that second group, hopefully that last group, trying to catch people who've done things really, really wrong is a lower percentage of the feedback that you have to give to people. And what the research says is people actually want feedback. And actually, young people want feedback more than others do. Their expectation is that their leaders will be giving them feedback to help them move forward. And that's from PwC. Okay. Another one is that 69% of employees said they would work harder if they felt their efforts were being recognized. That's that positive feedback, right? When we think about feedback, I think most of our minds go to that trying to correct things. It's really important to remember we have to positively tell people about what's working for us moving forward, right? How we appreciate their efforts, how they're helping the organization, et cetera. Okay. And I always like to use the framework, comes out of Center for Creative Leadership around feedback, of using some structure to make my feedback work. On that situation, the behavior, and the impact. Make it about the fact. It's about the behavior that we see that we would like to change or that we would like to honor. We don't want to generalize it around the person. Okay. We put in a couple of do's and don'ts for you there. And in actuality, I would add a second I to that SBI framework, that situation, behavior, impact, and I would add inquiry. The best feedback when you're trying to help coax somebody to work in a little bit different way is to move from that feedback of me facing that person to using inquiry, getting on the same side of the table and looking at the problem to find a better solution. Okay. Using inquiry to help people see it in a little bit broader perspective. Okay. That same stuff lasts for positive feedback as well. Saying good job and thank you is nice, but it could be oh so much more powerful if you'd use that situation, the behavior, and the impact. Okay. So I'm going to skip to the end. We have a couple of things in there about mindset. If you find stepping into especially difficult feedback situations challenging, I threw in a little bit about how you're looking at this is going to have a big impact on how well you can do it and how easily you can step into it. If your thought is feedback is going to be really miserable, difficult, and ugly, it probably will be. If you're looking at it and saying feedback is about how I can help this person grow, help this person be more successful, and I'm doing it because I care about them and want them to succeed, feedback becomes a lot easier to both prepare for and to carry out. Okay. So we threw in a little bit there around the virtual world. Feedback is every bit as important in the virtual world as it ever was in the workplace. And with those connections in general having been eroded because we're not interacting quite as often, it's really important to kind of keep the mindset in place and to also keep in mind looking for those opportunities to actually give positive feedback as well, so that people can actually hear when we have some corrective lessons. So we have rolled through super, super quickly 4 different areas where I think you have a really big impact on leading and making yourself and your teams much more successful. A little bit on emotional intelligence, psychological safety, listening, and feedback skills, all critically important to us. Brett, I burned up all of my time already, so I'm going to have to pass it back to you.
That's fine. That's fine. And actually, there were a few comments and questions that I think are more important than anything I would say in a conclusion kind of thing. So I'm going to cut my conclusion really short, and I want to go to these things. First of all, there was a comment that somebody said, I think it's easier for people to ignore you if you work remotely. It's a little harder face to face. So I want to highlight anybody who is in a supervisory role, a leader role of any kind. Listen to this comment that one of your peers on this webinar said, I think it's easier for people to ignore you if you work remotely. That you as a leader may or may not feel like you are ignoring people. That might not be your intent at all. But again, so much of what we're talking about here is try to put yourself in the other person's perspective, especially if you're a leader. If you do get that book, The Leadership Challenge, you will read that the basic premise of that is that leadership is a relationship. So it has to be your job as a leader to try to decipher for the people on your team, hey, who might be feeling ignored? Who do I need to reach out a little bit more? And quite honestly, DISC styles play into that a little bit. Some people driven by their style, might be totally fine not hearing for you from weeks. I don't suggest that as a leadership style, but they might be okay. Others might say, hey, it's been 3 days since I've heard from my leader. Why are they ignoring me? So that's something very important for you to think about. The other thing that I saw a ton of comments about was the whole chat feature. And there was almost a real-time dialogue around, okay, is this chat helping, contributing to what we're doing here today, or is it hurting? We got a little sidetracked on the Tetris conversation, but I would argue that for some of us, that chiming in about Tetris and Wordle and having a little bit of a little bit of fun moment here in the middle of this discussion probably created a little bit of levity. It might have brought you back here. I was working with the team just yesterday, and they were doing an exercise, and they were talking about different disc styles. And one of the women said, "Well, this group out here was being loud and disruptive, and that's just a fact." And I had to laugh because, well, they might have been loud, but were they really disruptive? It might have been for them. That was a really important connection factor. So especially as a leader, you of course need to be mindful if things are getting totally out of control. But for something like chat here, I mean, even when it was going, the Tetris kind of conversation, I was wondering a little bit, have we gone too far off? But if I didn't want to participate in reading the Tetris and I wanted to stay focused on what Evans was saying, because it's so riveting, I would stay there. And so there's a little bit of give and take, and it's understanding those perspectives and really taking those in. That's at the core of everything that we're talking about here. So I'm going to conclude with just going back to Evans, put up again the opportunity that everybody has to get started the same way Sam did with getting a copy of Solving the People Problem. You can get that on the URL on the screen. I know that this is the last, I can't believe that this is the last session of this year's Lean Conference. It's been a fantastic conference. I'm really thrilled that Results Washington is going to put all of the recordings up in about a week. I didn't say directly a week. So somewhere around a week, week and a half, give them 2 weeks before you start calling. But there are some fantastic presentations that came before us. There are some others about the 6 Working Geniuses by Amy Lineker. There was emotional intelligence. There were some about some fantastic lean tools. So I encourage everybody, tell your friends, go back. There is so much great information here. But for the Results Washington team, I will go ahead and do what is so difficult for me, and that's shut up and let you guys go ahead and conclude this. Thanks for everybody for coming and enjoying our time with us.
Thank you so much, Brett and Evans, for just being with us today and all the knowledge that you just dropped on us. It's the end of the day, but I feel like we had so many great questions, a lot of engagement in the chat. Thanks for keeping it fun. I've been chuckling just, monitoring the chat, but appreciate everybody, and just for sharing the importance of just how communication and self-awareness, intentional listening can really help us. So I hope everybody was able to grab a little bit of some nuggets today. We will make sure to get the updated presentation online, so check that out on our website. Thanks again. We want to say thanks again to our ASL interpreters and our live captioners. Just being able to make everything go smoothly these last 2 weeks. We so appreciate your time and your effort.